Most people don't think of strategy that way.
Developing a new strategy.
Strategic blind spots.
When strategy meets reality.
Strategy and innovation.
In the strategy world.
Drive their strategic goals.
And welcome back to Strategy Meets Reality podcast. Welcome back to the Strategy Meets Reality podcast. I'm delighted to be joined by Richard Claydon today. We had your colleague on here a few weeks ago, Stefan Laval. So, Richard, it's great to have you on and welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be on. I really enjoyed Stefan, so I'm happy to be following it up.
Ah, awesome. So just before we get into that, do you mind giving a bit of background about yourself and a bit of context about what you've been up to lately for our listeners?
Yeah, so ultimately I have a PhD in organisational theory and have specialise in the leadership area of organisational theory, and very specialised in how do you develop leaders to thrive and create value in complex and ambiguous organisational environments, especially ones that are fast changing. The work I do with Stefan, it relates to how that might happen in contemporary organisational environments where the complexity and ambiguity kind of Stefan wraps up in his term confusion tax, which is the kind of argument that there's so much entanglement, and the language he used was run work, serve work and change work. There's so much entanglement between them that everybody gets confused. And how do you start creating value in those kind of conditions? How do you lead in those kind of conditions? And I found that a really useful shorthand way of kind of getting people to get into the understanding of complexity and ambiguity and a kind of constant change. They kind of really can wrap their heads around the idea of entangled loads and confusion tax.
That's great. And I see it often where leaders almost look for this utopia. They want this utopia where everything's perfect. They've got the perfect org design. Everything's how they envision it to be. But it's never like that. There's always going to be things that are broken. You're not always going to get the resources that you would like. It's not going to be perfect. So, when they haven't got that perfect org design, or they haven't gone down that world where Stefan's talking about, they do the redesign and got the appetite, what should leaders do?
Well, I think first of all, they have to give up the idea of utopia. And I think actually you're probably talking about almost a theoretically informed leader, someone who hasn't worked in the trenches, that they've possibly come up through business schools and consultancies and have been parachuted into the top jobs, and they think they can just do top-down design. That's not necessarily my audience. My audience is, I would call it the coordinating middle. And so, and again, in Stefan's language, that's the people who do serve work. They're coordinating between all the various stakeholders and functions, and they're carrying that load, but they're also translating the change into executional reality. And I don't think they would ever recognize the utopian design principle. They would love if the organization was designed that way. But they would say, and I think this is where some of the differences between Stefan and I sit, I would love it as well if we could do that design. Yeah. But there's no budget for it most of the time. There's no appetite for it. The people at the top just assume that the middle will work. And then they argue that the problem it's not working is because we don't have good enough people, and these people in that coordinating middle aren't doing the work properly. But I would argue they're under a lot of pressure. But they're also in these entangled conditions. The conditions are hard to read. They're hard to survive. They're very hard to disentangle. So they are being asked to do lots and lots of run work, keep the operation going. They're being asked to do all the coordinating work between the stakeholders and the functions and the coordinating load. They're being asked to translate change. It's all being wrapped into one. And that very often kind of opens up into like 14-hour days. Because there's so much work that the only work that's really visible is the run work, and all the work, other stuff has to be packaged around the outside or done in the evening or over the weekend, etc. And I would suggest that the lived experience of that is very intense for lots of people. And I have three terms. I tend to keep on sticking to three terms. So we talk about run, serve, and change. But the lived experience is stretch, tangle, and drift. So they're either stretched to kind of like do more, run faster, add more on, keep on being the hero. They're tangled where they've got this stakeholder wants one thing, another stakeholder wants another thing, a third stakeholder wants something else. They can't serve all three of them at the same time. And then they're also drifting because you've got all of this change piled upon them.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, I just don't have the energy or the enthusiasm to believe in this working anymore. So I'm disengaging and I'm drifting and I'm cynical and I'm apathetic in order just to cope with that being piled on top of the other stuff that I'm already doing. So most of them, they're all still leaders. They're leading functions, they're leading projects, they're all still leading, but they're following people higher up who are quite detached from that work.
Yeah.
And lots of them, in my experience, are surviving rather than thriving. And because of that, they can't develop. The system is kind of consuming all of the development time that they might have. So they're constantly just running to stand still. So they're just overspending all of their energy just to remain functional, not to actually do better work in these systems.
Yeah. And you see it, even go down to very simplest thing, like, having time to actually pause and just reflect on what's going on is an absolute premium, because you see it all the time. They're just constantly on back-to-back Teams meetings. There's another meeting they have to go to. There's another board. There's another thing that happens. They didn't even get that time to sit there and just reflect and think, well, what is happening? Is this the best use of what needs to be done? They didn't even get that, because it's like you said, it's that pressure of all the run stuff is getting too much.
Not sitting down and thinking. And I've had this very conversation with some C-suite guys, when people hire in higher positions generally. And they said, look, if my CEO asked me what I did this morning and I said I sat and thought, he said, I'll just lose my job because I'm not delivering, I'm not running.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about how to do the serve work or how to do the change work. So he was always, and he was someone who was really quite anxious, despite being very successful. He had that anxiety sitting behind him all the time. And that's a big challenge. So again, it's kind of thinking and serve work and change work, because it's not visible, is coded very often either internally or externally. So either your lived experience, your felt experience is this is not work, because it's not being seen as visible work. And so you're wrestling with the anxiety of what needs to be done isn't actually work.
Yes.
But actually that's the leadership work that you don't have time to do. And the run work is not necessarily the leadership work, because or it's a very narrow slither of what leadership looks like. So that I come across that all the time with the people I work with is they're going, this isn't work. This or doesn't get seen as work.
No.
And so you have to give them opportunities to craft out a space where they can do that work, and that work becomes visible and they don't feel guilty about shifting some of the run work somewhere else.
Yeah, it's the same with planning. When you go for that strategy into execution, you do that planning work. Again, that we don't value time and space for that, because it doesn't feel like it's work. It feels like it's unnecessary. Well, we've made a decision. Let's just go. And you hear people going, we just need to be faster. We need to be more agile. And yeah,
there's something to that. I mean, I think if you split work into different tempos around this type of work, so if you look at the planning and then the execution, planning is slower. It should be slower than execution, but very often the planning is like, we'll do that fast and then we'll do the execution fast, and that's great. But what the actual data shows is if you do the planning slowly, the execution speeds up, because in the planning you've kind of identified where lots of the execution problems might be. The clarity's there, the coherence is there, everybody can kind of go off and deliver. But it could be sped up. There are methodologies that could make the planning quicker and more enjoyable. Yeah. Where there could be a huge competitive advantage, because at the moment, say it takes, to plan well, maybe it takes a month in order to get the speed down the line with the execution guys. But what happens if you could do exactly the same quality of work in a week?
Yes.
Against your competitors who spend a month to 6 weeks doing it. And there are all kinds of methodologies that can enable that. But they're all part of kind of the serve work and the change work that's seen by most of the kind of the leadership development or the managerial work as not work, as not mainstream, as not the way things are done around here.
Yeah. I think it's that dominance of the operational that run work, I think, gets in the way. And then you're thinking about and I was reflecting on this because there was a recent thing at the moment with AR. I can't even say his name now, but the guy that murdered the children in Ralikari, that's it. Yeah, in Southport, yeah. And they just
I was 15 minutes away the day that happened. I was in Formby, yeah.
Wow,
it's where my parents live.
Yeah, it's absolutely shocking. But the thing, they just put out all the reflections from the review of all the failings that happened, and obviously the same thing comes out again. Oh, there was silos. There's silos. This, and I said, but the problem is, all that's going to happen from it is the same thing that then creates more burden for leaders, because they're not going to look at, like we're talking about, some of the structural stuff around, how are these things split and lumped together? What's the decision rights? What's the coordination with it? What they'll do is they'll now create a performance board. They'll create a team of people that will add more reportings, and they'll be expecting the leaders now to do more reporting to demonstrate how they're now communicating across these boundaries that exists. Then there'll be PBR boards and more boards, which create more meetings, which don't actually solve the problem. They just make an appearance that they are solving the problem. It just creates a theatre that they're doing something rather than actually doing something. And that might just be me being cynical, but I don't know. What's your reflections?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think you kind of you're taking me into, I think, once you've got people past just surviving and you're trying to help them thrive, I think you're moving towards what thriving might begin to look like, because you're showing what non-thriving looks like. Okay, something goes wrong, and then you have all of these analytical reviews about it. Someone somewhere is going to get blamed and lose their job, but it's probably not just going to be their fault. They're going to be scapegoated, and you kind of get rid of that person, and the whole point of the scapegoat is all the evils go with them, and then the organization is fine again. But I would argue that actually there are something missing in how we think about leadership and how we develop leaders that is causal of this. So again, I've got three bits of three acronyms or shortenings to talk about this. So I would argue that leadership is arranged around three different dimensions. One is sovereignty. So sovereignty is, does the leader provide direction, clarity, authority, decisions, etc.? And now there's a huge amount of training around that. And I think the leader that you've kind of identified at the beginning, this hypothetical leader, believes that if he just does that, everything's kind of going to fall into place and the organization's going to work fine. You then got a solidarity grammar for leadership, which is around trust, commitment, care, and alignment, which is very big in leadership theory, but it doesn't necessarily translate into these higher echelons of leadership. But you see it embedded in the organization. You see an awful lot of leaders in the middle kind of going, well, I care about my teams and I want to look after them, etc. So that's the second part. Now, I think those two parts are trained all the time. They are what people think of when they think of leadership: sovereignty, decisions, direction, solidarity, trust, commitment, care, etc. But both assume that the situation is always intelligible. Yes. So both assume is that we can direct it, and then we can care for people doing it at the same time. But if the system isn't intelligible, if the system is being misread, the better direction is going to intensify the errors, and the better alignment, it can help people endure the error more gracefully. So the sovereignty, it can become very blunt, and solidarity can become compensatory to the fear. This is how you cope. So I think the language that is the grammar that is missing is a sense-making grammar. So to go back to your point, and really Stefan's point as well around the coordinating serve layer, the change layer, that's where the sense-making grammar sits. How do you sense-make what your part of the organization is doing and how they're interpreting it versus another part of the organization versus another part of the organization? How do you move across those boundaries and kind of do some meta sense making and say, right, okay, let's do this. Do I get your agreement? Do I get your agreement, etc.? How do we need to change all of this around before we act? And then also, well, okay, if we're going to go and do it, we also need to sense make what the change is doing. Is a change that we've kind of agreed that we're going to try, is that working the way that we expect it? So there's a bunch of questions really that you're looking at. And I don't say that sense making, and I think one of the big challenges with the complexity in systems thinking discourse is that sense making replaces sovereignty and solidarity, and you don't need those aspects of leadership. And I wouldn't make that argument. I would say you still need them. But I think that sense making is vital because it helps the leader know what kind of work is happening, what kind of strains are present, what the role's being asked to hold, and what moves the systems can bear next. And if we're not asking that, if we're not sense-making around that and connecting the organisation around that, yet the sovereignty and the solidarity can both go wrong. And they go wrong, I think, in exactly the ways I've heard you talk about, is that the strategy moves off in the wrong direction and all the execution, you're executing on the wrong things. And then everybody's doing care theatre just to try and help them hold the loads a little bit more. But nothing is holding it together. Nothing is pulling the pieces together. No. So that would be my argument, is you've got to have a trichotomy of sense of leadership grammars. Solidarity for direction, sovereignty for direction, solidarity for care, and then sense making for, okay, what the understanding, what actually is going on here. Yeah.
And you can see that the sometimes the sovereignty and the solidarity can come at a tension, a really tough tension that a lot of people try to manage. And also on a sort of personal level, people have a higher sort of preference towards being more in the sort of solidarity than may do the direction. But I do see that all the stuff that I talked about with Stefan and we've talked about here, that you're right with the sovereignty, not sovereignty, the solidarity. There we go. That it comes as a sort of a sticking plaster in the wrong way, because everyone's stressed. So they're going, right, we need to do more stuff about well-being, and then we'll do tabletop yoga, or we'll go off and do like Go Ape or something, to try and mask that. And then the people on there, they probably would like those things, but in the back of their mind, they're stressed because they're going, I've got so much to catch up on. I've got so much to do. Where I think that you're right with that sense making. I think, and it links back to what we were talking about earlier around that space to just sit and think. That sense making is very much a thinking. It's a exercise to have a look and go, is this what we intended it to do? Are we seeing the outcomes that we were expecting to do? If not, then what needs to adjust? Which links back to the sovereignty. What new direction do we need to get, and so on. And I think that is a really crucial point. And I think sometimes, and I think you alluded to about the complexity theory and system, I sort of agree. I think some of the complexity stuff, unfortunately, is going in this very, very unusable, hand-wavery world, where actually what you're talking about is really tangible stuff that, right, yes, we understand it's complex, but how do we actually enable people to navigate it rather than just talk about it?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the core challenges, that the two literatures don't talk to each other. Leadership studies was born out of the desire to develop leaders to handle more complex organizations in the 1960s. I mean, it's a very, very clear hypothesis. Call to action. Organizations are getting more complex. We have macho control style managers who are not capable of leading in complexity. How do we develop people who can hold the complexity? And they've moved into, you'll be aware of the stuff, the transformational leader and the authentic leader and the servant leader. Yes. It's all best intentioned models to hold the complexity that don't work.
Yeah.
Because they're just partial. Yeah. So you've got systems thinking and complexity, and they've gone the opposite way. They've gone, right, we need to sense make the organizations and either let the organizations emerge through the sense making or design it kind of top down through our own sense making, and that they're having wars in between themselves about whether it should be fully emergent or fully top down or hybrid or but the disciplines, the leaders don't understand that. They are either just kind of, I need to be this transformational kind of hero, this messiah. I mean, one of my favorite theorists, Simon Weston, talks about it as a messiah leadership model, that they hold all of the tensions themselves. They're almost these superheroic figures that sit right at the top of the organization and hold all of the complexity. Absolutely nonsensical. That's an impossibility for anybody. But it's a very seductive discourse. It's that stretch. If you just work hard enough, you can become this superheroic figure who can hold the complexity. It's just a pipe dream. And it lacks the sense making grammar. It's just not part of the discourse. It's all around motivating others to do the work. It's all around, it's not even around, you've even got lots of the sovereignty stuff disappears. They just sit there as these incredible moral and motivational figures sitting above the organization and using that charismatic value. I mean, the way we talked about leaders in the 1800s, kind of charismatic presence to somehow pull all the complexity together into this one figure. And I just think it's an absolute nonsense. And I see it developed so often. And you just think, well, you're spending all of this money on chasing something that is an impossibility.
Yeah. And you see it. You've got two real core things. One is more explicitly talked about, which is what you were talking about, which I suppose does the solidarity really badly, is this really humble, loving, it's the same. It's just the crap that Simon Sinek goes about all the time. And those sort of people, you're a leader, not a boss, or you're a leader, not a manager. And they put this leader as this, like you said, messiah figure that is just this absolute angel that loves everyone. That comes out and gives the peasants, the sandwiches at lunchtime. But you've got this other part that's not really explicitly talked about, but shows up a lot in the sort of definitely social media world, where about it's this constant grind. It's all about the grind. You need to just be there. You need to take control, give the answers, and you see it reflected into politicians, where they're expected to have the answer for absolutely everything, and if they don't have the answer for that, then their people are calling for their blood. And this is the sort of subliminal stuff that's on the sideline, that people are trapped between this: do I need to be this messiah, or do I need to be this person that needs to know absolutely everything, have all the answers, and control the situation? And I could see how leaders
I think it's two sides of the same coin. So on one side, I mean, I think you've described kind of servant or ethical leadership in your kind of the one that cares and does all of that work. So that they're very much part. It's part of the moral dimension of leadership. Yeah. So if we're looking at the solidarity grammar, the moral version of that is the most recent within the theories. It's like the leader has to be this authentic moral figure that sits that everybody can follow, because they display their moral value all the time. But one form of morality is the grind. No matter how hard it is, I get it done.
Yeah.
No matter how difficult it is, I find the answer. So it's still a perception that leadership is coded through morality, and that actually the great leaders have these two sides of their morality. They care about everybody, and they're almost omnipotent in their capacity to absorb and hold the complexity of what's going on their shoulders.
Yeah. So I know in your writing you use a protagonist in there called Maya. So people are aware, I will share Richard's work, but you use fictional characters to prove your point or not to prove your point, but to place your point in there. And one of them's Maya, and Maya or Maya, I don't know, but how you pronounce it. But you use something in her which about, well, when it's not perfect, what can you actually do as a leader to be able to navigate that? you mind explaining more
Yeah,
about that?
yeah, I will. So Maya, I mean, she's not purely fictional. She's an amalgamation of effective leaders I've worked with that I. So one of the challenges in writing leadership research and organizational research nowadays is how much you have to disguise everything.
Yeah.
Because there's stuff that I can talk about, but I can't reveal anything about what organization it is or who I'm talking about. So she's an amalgamation of quite a lot of people in quite a lot of organizations. So it's constantly disguised like a regional leader in a professional services firm.
Yeah.
And Maya, one of the reasons she's called Maya is you can't even geographically locate the name Maya. There's so many different countries that have Maya as a name so she's kind of geographically anonymous as well. There are other reasons she's called Maya because of the extinction of the Mayan civilization, that kind of break between the old and the new. And she's the mother of Hermes, the trickster god. So there's a whole bunch of reasons because she's giving birth to a different form of leadership that seems like trickery to those who are not versed in it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of the reasons for her. And so really she is somebody who does represent someone who can hold all three of the leadership grammars together. She does have a level of sovereignty. She has a definite solidarity with the people she works with, but she's exceptional at sense making. And I'd break the sense making down into three things that she does. And this is, the Mayas that I've worked with, most of the work is around building up and developing the capacity to do these three things. So the first one is to create conditions where she and her team, so we'll just use Maya as the avatar, so Maya and her team can read the conditions properly. So they can diagnose the confusion tax and they can disentangle the role tangles, they can name their hidden burdens, and then they stop turning the structural problems into personal failings. And by doing that, they can go, all right, here's the situation comes first. Let's work out, are we serving? Are we changing? Are we running? Which of us actually has the right capacity to start, to actually have the authority to say, no, this is a change problem, and it's a change problem related to this, and therefore I'm going to take most of the ownership of it because it's something I know more about than everybody else in the team. That might not be Maya. Maya might be saying, okay, right, you're leading this now. And most of the Mayas I work with, they end up having the people reporting to them leading these sub-projects. And also, rather than just having an executive leadership meeting where they hear about each of the projects for 5 minutes, they will have all of the executive leadership team to hear about one of the projects for maybe an hour and a half. So it becomes a kind of a narrative about what's going on. They all ask questions. They can work out how it might scale into the work they're doing. So that situational ownership ripples through the rest of the team. And they can start saying, 80% of that aligns with or coheres with this. And it only means that reduces the workload I've got here by 80% because I've only got to change 20% of it for my local context. So there's that going on. And that's where Maya's sovereignty and solidarity comes in. She gets the sense making, she puts structures in and directions in. This is how we're going to run meetings. We're going to stop doing that. We're going to start doing this. And then she constantly develops people to have the confidence to, it's your agenda. Okay, how do you design agenda? How do you design this kind of meeting? How do you go out and do the work? So you've got that going on at the same time. So she has that interpretive practice, which is the first sub-grammar of sense making. That's within her team usually. Now then she has to go beyond a team. So a team has done the interpretation. They've worked out what they think is going on. But what is going on is serve work, so it's cross-functional. Or it's change work, which needs a bunch of sponsors to actually kind of say, yes, you can do this, or no, you can't. So, Stefan would just say, oh, well, that should just be a local decision, but it isn't. So you've got to go and do the work. And that moves into mobilization. So mobilization is moving into the network. So when you're looking at networks and complex networks and complexity science, it's going into the organizational network and say, okay, let's create a network map. Who are the stakeholders here? If we do this, who is it going to impact? Can I get their agreement before I do it? What do I have to change in what I've currently planned to get their agreement? If I have to change something after I've got somebody else's agreement, then I've got to go back and socialize it with them. So you still have to do work that Stefan would say is too slow and it could be turned into architecture. And I don't disagree. It could be.
Yeah.
But at the moment, in most cases, it's not. So they go and do that work, or they go, and this would be what Maya is doing, not her team. So this is Maya working with peers or seniors, doing the politics, getting alliances, working out where the power is to get the kind of sponsorship that she needs, but also being able to talk different languages. Because if she's talking to ops or marketing or a project team or finance, she's got to frame what she's doing through language that they understand, which is not necessarily the same outlets. So the whole thing is you don't go into the network with an argument. You go in with stories that get people on your side. So you're building alliances and you're building legitimacy in order to get sponsorship and support for the work that you're trying to do. Yeah. And then I think the most important thing that they actually do, so they've worked out the situation and they've done that interpretation works. They've mobilized enough of the rest of the organization to get the sponsorship and support. So they've legitimized it. They've got enough allies. And then she's going to change something. And it's going to be something not insignificant, but not organization wide. I mean, it's still, it's going to be affecting maybe a part of the region with, maybe 3 or 4 functions involved. And this is a realization that most leaders need to really grapple with. Most of you don't have enough power to even contemplate trying to redesign the entire system. And even if you do, most of the time it's a pipe dream, unless you're lucky enough to get someone like Stefan to actually start asking you the right questions about how it might happen. So what does redesign actually look like? Well, it looks like creating an island of coherence. So the island of coherence is both your own team, which is capable of the interpretive work, the allies and the sponsors, and then some kind of bounded space where you can experiment in a way that reduces the confusion and improves coordination for all of the allies and the people that you've agreed with. Now, if you've created that island of coherence and it works, you've then got enough legitimacy and kind of sponsorship power to say, well, we could do the same thing over here and we could do the same thing over there. So you're beginning to scale from these small experimental, and initially it might just be somebody noticing something in your team saying, this doesn't seem to be, and that ripples upwards into a scaling opportunity. So that's kind of the process that I work through. And all of the processes still have that solidarity and sovereignty grammar. She still is always showing that she cares, and she's still always using her positional power to create direction and to put structures in place, etc. That never goes away. But that sense-making work, it's not just us sitting in a room sense-making and then directing. It's us sense-making, mobilizing that interpretation, experimenting with it, creating some bounded cohesion. And then if that works, then we can look at scale. It's kind of the same argument Stefan's making, but we're coming at it from different angles. So Stefan's coming at it from an organizational design angle where he's got full sponsorship from entire C-suite to go through a process, XYZ process, which is perfectly and utterly legitimate. And it would be a much better world if we did have organizations and senior leadership looking at it through his diagnostic approach. My approach is, well, what does it mean in the lived reality for most people in the coordinating middle to do this level of work? And given very, very few are trained to do it, how do you quickly upskill them to do this level of work and not collapse in the process?
Because you highlighting some really key elements here, is that, first one, I think it's fundamental that underpins it all, is that you as a team do have agency to a point. Because too many teams and leaders look at the thing and I think they overwhelm themselves with the whole system, and they're like, we're so constrained, like it's just not working. But they focus so much on those constraints and get overwhelmed by the whole. They don't look for their freedoms. Like what freedoms do we actually have? And I think that's the underlying piece. And then there's the bit around the sense making, that opportunity to take space away. But I think we're too sort of in that solidarity space where when we get a team day, it's a team day. We go off and do Go Ape, and it's good, and it builds familiarity. That's cool, but there needs to be a time where you make space to understand the situation. How's it affecting us? Like really sense.
So I would reject out of hand any leadership development programs that says, "Oh, we're going to go and do some managed fun." I'm like, no, we're going to.
Yeah.
You're going to go and have it. If you want to go and do something afterwards together, go to a nice restaurant and eat and something. That's fine. What we need to work with the work.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
It needs to actually have meaning and seriousness, and we can have fun with the work. So that's one of the things I always struggle to get across the line.
Yeah.
That wrestling with the work is going to be fun because I'm going to give you methodologies to do it that speeds up all of your sense making and gives you a route forward to doing it.
Yeah.
But of course, lots of people are like, "Oh, I just want to escape from the work for a day," and just and that can be a challenge.
Yeah, I think so, and I think there's better with the spontaneous nature afterwards to go for a beer. I just really get frustrated when I see these things where they go, we've got a team session and they've got bloody Lego, they've got bloody marshmallows, or they're taking the tyres off a Formula One car. And I'm thinking, come on, where really what you're thinking about, I think we're aligned in that sense, is that actually you can have it fun. And it's also quite cathartic in the sense making part, is actually what is the situation? What are the sort of internal factors that are making it more difficult? What are the external factors that make it more difficult for us right now? What are the risks that we're facing? To really get that part to do, and I don't think people value that time away to really do that sort of sense making work. And the other part is around, you brought it up around the language. Now we always say in the in the systems world, boundaries create difference creates boundaries. And that means that people are going to interpret things completely differently. And your whole point around, I'm not going into the other team or the other ops director and going, you're not doing your work, you need to do this. I need to understand what the language difference is. Like what from their perspective, how can I share this challenge that is understandable so they can have space to interpret what I'm asking?
So that's. I mean, there is a way to do it, but it's a very difficult way to articulate because, I mean, the classic way of thinking about it is, how do I put this in their functional language? Now, as soon as you do that, you're dead, because there's no way that you can present finance to a way that is not going to be dominated by someone who's in finance.
Yeah.
That they will just know too much. And so if they don't want something to happen and you're making a financial argument for it, you're going to lose.
Yeah.
So you're in that kind of antagonistic clash here because you're trying to use their language. So, and I think there is a way of doing it, but it's not something that I say some people who work with me really love it, but most people find it quite difficult. But I would argue that there are 5 social worlds within all organizations. So the first social world, and I think we've probably already touched on it, but the first social world is kind of meaning and morality, and the purpose. What and some of this could be solidarity, or but some of it could be meaning and morality. Could be shareholder value. The only thing that matters here is shareholder value. That's still a moral position. If you believe that shareholder value creates value for everybody in the organisation and the wider world, and that's that's an ethical position. That's fine. I don't have to agree with that, but you're taking an ethical stance. So that's the first social world. So if you're talking to somebody in that social world, which is quite often strategists, senior leaders, HR might be in that social world as well because they believe in the morality space. Well, you have to be creating a moral picture and a picture full of meaning, replete with meaning. Then you've got 4 other social worlds, and I won't go into them in so much depth, but it's the same challenge. How do I talk to people inhabiting this social world? So the second one is structure and order. So how do we actually have to change the way the hierarchy is, or the system? So systems thinkers might sit there. The third one is enterprise and livelihood, literally the people doing the work. The next one is narrative and legitimacy. How, if we do this, are we going to tell stories that grab people's attention? And then the final one is innovation or emergence and disruption. How, is this new? Is this stuff that's right on the edge, and how if you're talking to an innovation team or somebody who thinks they're super living on the edge of what the organizer, how do you talk to them? So you've got to, and so in the mobilization part of the sense-making grammar, you have to kind of go, well, okay, these people, you've almost got to think of it. I want to get alliances, but I know that they're going to defend the structure and the order. I know I'm going to have to show them that it's not going to break what they think good structure looks like. Whereas this person is going to resist because they're going to say, well, this puts an extra 5 or 6 hours of work on me and my team every week, and we're already stretched to the limit because that's the enterprise and livelihood issue. Or somebody else is going to use the disruption argument and say, well, that's not radical enough, we need to go further. How upfront do you think about all of these social worlds you're going to move into? Now, these are very, very old arguments. This is not new stuff. But it's been forgotten by organisations that this is going, because the organisations have moved into one culture, one organisation. Everybody's supposed to be thinking the same way. And the idea that there are different languages and different social worlds going on, and you actually have to understand them, is just lost. As I say, for most people, I haven't really been able to articulate it well enough for people to kind of grapple with it and grasp onto it and say, yes, I understand that. Whereas the leadership grammars and stretch, tangle and drift and run, serve, change, people get all of that.
Yeah.
But that further step of how do I do this well is something I'm still working on to make it more legible.
I think it's because partly, it's not wholly, but partly that the idea of silos are seen as a toxicity that needs to be rooted out rather than a natural occurrence due to boundaries. So the fact that as soon as you can sit there as a leader and think naively that if I set one set of values and all this stuff, the whole organization will be the same. It's not, because as soon as you split something, you create a boundary. Within that boundary, you create difference. You create different language, different perspectives, and that's what we need to worry about and concern ourselves with. Was that what is their language? Like, I'm not going to go to France. Well, I do because I'm English. So I'll just go speak English in France. Ideally, if you want to do well, you wouldn't. You will understand from theirs and think about, I'm not going to be as perfect to them, but I'm going to have found a way of commonality to be able to think. And I think that, I think this idea that they don't realise that silos actually exist for a reason.
Yeah, I mean, and I think when you said toxicity, I mean, that's a word I really struggle with in organisations because, and I mean, Stefan made the point in your last podcast, most people just want to do the work well.
Yeah.
And actually, the toxicity is caused by, I think, the entanglement.
Yeah,
people don't have time, and so when somebody doesn't hear them, or you go to another department and you can't make the argument to them, you need them to do some work to help you, but you don't have the capacity to make the argument to them because you don't understand their social world, you don't understand what they're going through. And you ask them to do it, and they just go, "No, don't have time." So you go back to your own department and go, "Oh, they're toxic assholes."
Yeah.
But they're not. You've come to them. You're a stranger in their town, and you've said, "Do this because it's important." Well, what do you expect is going to happen?
Yeah.
Be able to craft much better stories. So I think lots of organizations create toxicity, and people are responding to toxic structures, but there's just no data that I've ever been able to find that suggests that more than kind of 10-12% of people are naturally inclined towards toxic behaviours. I mean, we're just not that as a species. So no. It's a design response. So, and I agree, the silos, if you can actually activate the differences between silos and you have that mobilisation capacity, you've got a huge advantage over your opposition. But just to assume you can dissolve them is almost nonsensical. Certainly, without doing a massive org redesign in the manner that Stefan envisages, which again, great if organizations want to do that. But you can't just say, we've got all these silos, we're going to dissolve them, everything's going to be fine, because that's not reality.
No, they'll do a let's work better together session, which will inevitably never work. But I'm conscious of time. I just wanted to ask one quick one before we do the final bit. But
Yeah.
what in the leadership development space, what do you think is often overlooked?
I mean, there's so much.
Yeah. When I was thinking about this question, I was thinking, yeah. But anyway, you like the key things.
I mean, I think we've kind of talked about the things that's most often overlooked, which is the sense making stuff. I mean, it's just not embedded in the literature. So when you're looking at the idea that leadership studies began out of an attempt to interrogate complexity and develop people who could carry complexity, that the sense making stuff moved into the systems world rather than into the leadership world. So you could actually argue that what is missing is sense-making, systems thinking, and complexity science. Now, because I'm an organisational theorist, I have somewhat of an understanding of it. Again, I'm no expert in any of these three spaces. Most of the sense-making stuff I've read, which was kind of embedded in the organisational literature of the sort of 60s and 70s and 80s, maybe even the 90s. But that's kind of moved off into the systems thinking and the complexity sciences disciplines. You don't find it too much in kind of the stuff which the organizational stuff that connects it with leadership. And so the gap's grown. So I think that's missing. But I think to kind of reverse your question, what is overemphasized? Well, what is overemphasized is a narrow belief about this authentic inner self, that if only you could uncover it, it's this pure, wonderful thing that if you uncovered it, this natural leadership essence will flow out of you and you will be amazing. I mean, that's everywhere.
Yeah.
And I just don't think that's what it is like to be human. The human is the opposite. We've got our light sides and our dark sides. We don't have a pure essence, but we have to play roles. And the leadership role is a role we have to play. And I think that's also missing. We don't talk about it as a role. I mean, we've talked about the leadership role for 8,000 years. We've talked about the leadership self really only since the 70s. But that's all of the stuff, how to play the role within the context of the system. So the idea that you're a self playing a role in a system is, as a coherent whole, is missing. Because the focus is on the self. All the sense making has gone into the system, and the role is almost unexplored.
Yes, yeah, I really agree. And this whole authenticity thing, I was saying like who you being authentic to, but you're right about the sense making. I just think that I'm a systems thinker. So is Stefan, and in there we do a lot of our work on the viable systems model, and even that relates to humans, and there's a whole point in there that Stafford Beer was getting across, which is about that capacity to look outside and beyond that sort of sense making. It's all about how do we sense make, and then how does that then drive in. But if you look at majority of things that I see in leadership development, especially literature, but also how the operating rhythm of an organization, it is not valued in any of those spaces, which I think is
I would agree.
Yeah, which is dangerous, definitely, when you're thinking about I'm a strategist, and strategy predominantly is about sense making, it's about orientation, it's about looking at trying to look at the differences between what I believe to be true and what's actually happening in reality. It's tough, but it involves that conceptual sense making.
Well, I think sense making has been stripped out of a lot of strategy work as well.
Oh yeah.
I mean, the stuff that I find interesting in the strategy field versus what I hear out in the world they're so far apart. It's crazy because there doesn't seem the sense making in that I come across, or the strategy that I come across, seems lacking the sense making. It's just a set of targets. Yeah, and I'm like, well, that's not a strategy. That's just a goal.
Yeah, but even the tools, everyone's rushing to breaking frameworks to fill in boxes. Where's the sense making in that? You're narrowing the focus to fill boxes in. rather than actually understand the situation, look at the organisation and so on. But I think we could probably have a whole episode just going on like that. But what would you like to leave the listeners to think about from this episode?
Well, I've kind of got three things. Again, I think it kind of sums up what I've been talking about. So the first one is that most leaders in the coordinating middle, the lived experience is being stretched, it's being tangled, it's drifting. So you're surviving rather than thriving. And that makes it very difficult to make the developmental leaps that are required to do high quality leadership work in that space. Whether you get formal leadership development or whether you go and buy some airport books or even some slightly better airport books and airport books, you're probably going to come across the traditional leadership grammars of direction and care or sovereignty and solidarity. They are both still important, but they're not enough if the situation that you're being asked to lead in is being misread. And because of run, serve and change and the confusion checks, the chances are it is. So where I think you have to look at developing yourself is, and the growth opportunity is somehow to become aware of the sense-making practices and processes. So how do you interpret the conditions of work better? How do you mobilize allies and sponsors? How can you run bounded experiments that create these islands of coherence that ultimately you can try to scale? So that's what I'd leave people with, those kind of 3 points.
Yeah, perfect. And that gives a lot of people really good stuff to reflect on. And I will share your Substack into the show notes because you write some fantastic articles about this. And I really like the way that you use the characters in there. I won't call them fictional characters anymore. Characters spread from
amalgamations.
Amalgamation, there you go. Amalgamations to really hit home the point that you're using. I think you do that very well. But Richard, thank you so much for being a fantastic guest.
Absolute pleasure.
And, I've loved our conversation. And this is the challenge with this podcast is that, I'd keep you on here for 3 hours, but unfortunately we have to cut it short there. But for the listeners, if you've liked this episode as much as I have, please like and share so that other people can get value from this, and especially value from Richard's work. I think in the leadership world, there's a lot to be done, and I think Richard, you're doing a good job on stretching us there. Thank you for so much.
Very much.
Cool. Take care.